The old truck rattled down the narrow mountain road, kicking up dust behind it. Behind the wheel sat a weathered man in his late 50s, his face lined with years of sun and solitude. His beard was thick and gray, and his hands gripped the steering wheel with the rough calluses of someone who'd spent decades working with wood and stone. He hadn't been down the mountain in almost 3 months. Living up there alone, he didn't need much. A bag of flour, some coffee, salt, and a few other basics would last him until winter truly set in. The small town at the base of the mountain felt foreign to him now, even though he'd made this trip hundreds of times over the past 20 years. The general store owner barely looked up when he walked in. They'd long ago stopped trying to make conversation with him. He paid in cash, took his supplies, and left without a word. That's how he liked it. No questions, no small talk, no reminders of the life he'd left behind. On the drive back up, he decided to take a different route. The main trail had been washed out by recent rains, and he'd heard from another hiker months ago about an alternate path. It would add an hour to his journey, but his truck could handle it. The October afternoon sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the pine trees. He'd been driving for about 40 minutes on the alternate route when he heard something that made him slow down. At first he thought it was an animal, maybe an injured deer or a coyote. But then he heard it again. It was a voice, a human voice, and it was crying for help. He stopped the truck and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, he could hear it more clearly now. It was coming from somewhere off the trail, maybe 100 yards into the woods. He sat there for a moment, his jaw clenched. Every instinct told him to start the engine and keep driving. Getting involved with people's problems wasn't something he did anymore. But the voice called out again, weaker this time, and something in its desperation made him open the truck door. He grabbed his flashlight and followed the sound through the dense underbrush. Fallen leaves crunched under his boots as he pushed through low-hanging branches. The old camping area came into view after a few minutes, an unofficial spot where hikers sometimes stopped for the night. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. A young girl, maybe 13 or 14 years old, was lying on the ground next to an overturned wheelchair. Her clothes were dirty and her face was streaked with tears and dirt. About 20 feet away, partially hidden behind a tent, he could see a man's body lying motionless. The girl's eyes went wide when she saw him. Fear and hope mixed together on her face. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Please help me. My dad, he's not moving. I've been calling for 2 days, but nobody came." He stood there, frozen. This was exactly what he'd been avoiding for 2 decades. People, problems, responsibility. He could turn around right now, drive to town and tell the sheriff. Let them handle it, but 2 days. She'd been out here for 2 days. He walked over to the man first, checking for a pulse he knew he wouldn't find. The body was cold, stiff. Heart attack most likely. From the look of things, the man was maybe 40 years old, slightly overweight. He'd probably been setting up camp when it happened. "Is he okay?" the girl asked, though her voice told him she already knew the answer. He walked over to her and knelt down. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "He's gone." She started crying again, but softer this time, like she had no tears left. He noticed her legs were bent at odd angles and she wasn't even trying to move them. "Your legs?" he asked. "I can't walk," she said between sobs. "I've been paralyzed since I was 7. Car accident. My dad, he was all I had. Mom died when I was little." The words hit him harder than he expected. He looked around the campsite. A storm was coming, he could feel it in the air. The temperature was already dropping, and those clouds to the west meant heavy rain by nightfall. "Anyone else know you're out here?" he asked. She shook her head. "We were supposed to be back yesterday, but we decided to stay an extra night. Dad's phone died and mine doesn't have service out here." He stood up and looked at the overturned wheelchair. It was damaged, one wheel bent badly. Even if he could get her into it, it wouldn't roll properly on this terrain. "Come with me," he said finally. She looked up at him with frightened eyes. "Where?" "My cabin. It's about an hour up the mountain. Storm's coming and you can't stay here. But my dad, I'll come back for him tomorrow. Right now, I need to get you somewhere safe and warm." She hesitated and he could see the fear in her eyes. He was a stranger, a rough-looking mountain man appearing out of nowhere. But what choice did she have? "Okay," she whispered. He bent down and carefully lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, all thin limbs and fragile bones. She wrapped her arms around his neck instinctively as he carried her back toward his truck. "The wheelchair," she said. I need it. He went back and grabbed the damaged wheelchair, loading it into the truck bed along with her backpack and a few other belongings from the campsite. The whole time his mind was racing. What was he doing? He wasn't equipped to take care of a paralyzed teenage girl. His cabin barely had running water. No electricity except for a small solar panel. No phone. No internet. But as he started the engine and began the drive up the mountain, with the girl sitting silently in the passenger seat staring at her hands, he knew there was no other choice. The nearest hospital was 3 hours away, and that storm was coming fast. By the time he could get her down there, they'd both be soaked and hypothermic. The first drops of rain started hitting the windshield as his cabin came into view. It was a small, rough structure built from logs he'd cut himself. Smoke from this morning's fire still drifted lazily from the stone chimney. He carried her inside and set her down on his only chair, a worn wooden rocker near the fireplace. She looked around at the sparse interior, the bare walls, the simple cot in the corner, the rough-hewn table. This was going to be her home now, at least for tonight. Outside, thunder rumbled across the mountain and the rain began in earnest. He looked at the frightened girl in his chair and she looked back at him. Neither of them said anything, but both of them knew the same thing. Everything had just changed. The rain hammered against the cabin's roof like 1,000 tiny drums. Inside, the silence between them was almost louder than the storm. The old man busied himself with the fire, adding logs and stirring the embers until flames danced high and bright. The girl sat in the rocking chair where he'd placed her, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering. He realized she was probably hungry. When was the last time she'd eaten? 2 days ago, before her father collapsed? "You need food," he said, his voice rough from lack of use. He wasn't used to talking much anymore. She nodded but didn't speak. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she kept glancing toward the door as if hoping her father would somehow walk through it. He moved to his small kitchen area, really just a counter and a few shelves against one wall. His supplies were basic. He pulled out some bread, a jar of preserves, and a tin of soup. Nothing fancy, but it would do. As he heated the soup over the fire, he kept sneaking glances at her. She looked so small and lost in his chair, her useless legs hanging limply. The wheelchair sat by the door where he'd left it, one wheel still bent at that awkward angle. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself. He hadn't meant to ask. Names made things personal, and personal meant complicated. "Lily," she said softly. "Lily Chen." He nodded but didn't offer his own name in return. She didn't ask. When the soup was ready, he poured it into a chipped bowl and handed it to her with a spoon. She took it with trembling hands and started eating slowly, mechanically, like her body knew it needed food even if her mind was somewhere else entirely. He made himself a bowl too and sat on the edge of his cot, eating in silence. The only sounds were the crackling fire, the pounding rain, and the occasional clink of their spoons against the bowls. "Where will I go?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice small. He looked up at her. "What do you mean?" "After the storm. Where will I go? I don't have anyone else. No aunts, no uncles, no grandparents. It was just me and Dad." The weight of her words settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd been so focused on getting her out of the rain that he hadn't considered what came next. "There's social services," he said finally. "Foster care. They'll figure something out." She looked down at her soup. "I've heard about foster homes. Kids at school talked about them. They said it's hard, especially for kids like me, kids like her, disabled kids, kids who needed extra care, extra attention, extra everything." He felt a knot forming in his stomach. "You'll be fine," he said, though the words felt hollow even to him. She didn't respond, just kept staring into her bowl. That night, he gave her his cot and made himself a bed on the floor near the fire. It wasn't comfortable, but he'd slept in worse places. The problem wasn't the hard floor. The problem was the thoughts racing through his mind. What had he gotten himself into? He lived up here precisely to avoid situations like this. No complications, no responsibilities, no one depending on him. And now there was a paralyzed girl sleeping in his bed, an orphan with nowhere to go. He listened to her cry softly in the darkness. She was trying to be quiet, probably didn't want him to hear, but the cabin was small and her grief was too big to hide. He wanted to say something comforting, but what could he say? That everything would be okay? That was a lie. Her father was dead, her life was shattered, and she was stuck in a mountain cabin with a stranger who could barely take care of himself. The storm raged on through the night. By morning it had passed, leaving everything clean and dripping. He got up stiffly from the floor and started the fire again. His back ached and his joints protested every movement. He wasn't young anymore. Lily was already awake when he looked over. She was lying on her side, staring at the wall. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she whispered back. He made them a simple breakfast of oatmeal and coffee for himself. Water for her. As they ate, he tried to figure out his next move. He needed to go back down to that campsite and deal with her father's body. He needed to contact the authorities. But he couldn't leave her here alone, and he couldn't take her with him. "Listen," he said, setting down his bowl. "I need to go back down the mountain today. To the campsite. But I can't take you with me, and I can't leave you here by yourself." Fear flashed across her face. "How long will you be gone?" "Most of the day, probably. I'll need to hike down since the truck can't make it all the way there, and then I'll need to get to town to contact the sheriff." "What if you don't come back?" Her voice was barely a whisper. The question hit him hard. It was a fair concern. She had no reason to trust him. For all she knew, he could just abandon her up here. "I'll come back," he said firmly. "I promise." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay." Before he left, he made sure she had everything within reach. Water, food, a blanket, some books from his small shelf. He showed her where the chamber pot was, awkwardly explaining how she could use it if needed. Her face burned with embarrassment, but they both knew it was necessary. "Keep the fire going," he instructed, showing her how to add logs from the pile he stacked nearby. "If you need help, there's a bell on that shelf. Ring it hard, and old Peterson about a mile down might hear it." "Might." "Okay," she said, her voice steadier now. He grabbed his pack and headed for the door, then paused. Without looking back, he said, "My name is William. Most people used to call me Will." "Thank you, Will," she said softly. The hike down to the campsite took him 3 hours. The rain had made everything muddy and treacherous. When he reached the spot, her father's body was still there, undisturbed. He said a quiet prayer, something he hadn't done in 20 years, and then covered the body with a tarp. The walk to town took another 2 hours. By the time he reached the sheriff's office, it was past noon, and his legs were screaming in protest. The sheriff, a younger man named Tom Rodriguez, listened to his story with growing concern. "A paralyzed girl, alone up at your place?" Tom asked. "Will, you know this is going to get complicated, right? Social services will need to get involved. There'll be questions." "I know," Will said tiredly. "But what else was I supposed to do? Leave her out there to die?" Tom shook his head. No, you did the right thing. It's just going to be a process, that's all." The sheriff made his calls, and soon the wheels of bureaucracy were turning. A recovery team would go up for the father's body in the morning. A social worker would come up to assess the situation and talk to Lily. Temporary custody paperwork would need to be filed. By the time Will started the trek back up the mountain, the sun was already setting. His body ached and his mind was exhausted. Part of him had hoped that once he reported everything, they'd come take her away immediately. But no, she'd be with him for at least a few more days while they sorted things out. When he finally reached the cabin, it was dark. But through the window he could see the warm glow of the fire. She'd kept it going, just like he'd shown her. He opened the door and Lily looked up from where she sat in the rocking chair. Relief flooded her face. "You came back," she said. And he heard the surprise in her voice. "Told you I would," he replied, dropping his pack by the door. As he warmed himself by the fire, he realized something that made his chest tighten. For the first time in 20 years, someone had been waiting for him to come home. The cabin hadn't been empty. There'd been a light in the window and a person inside who cared whether he returned or not. He didn't know whether that feeling was comforting or terrifying, probably both. 3 weeks had passed since that stormy night, and the cabin had changed in small but noticeable ways. A makeshift ramp now led from the door to the ground, constructed from spare planks Will had stored in his shed. The wheelchair, its bent wheel straightened as best as he could manage with his limited tools, sat ready by the entrance. Inside, shelves had been lowered. The water pitcher now sat on a table Lily could reach from her chair. Small adjustments made quietly in the early mornings when she was still sleeping, each one a silent acknowledgement that she was still here. The social worker had come and gone twice now, a tired woman in her 40s named Mrs. Patterson, who'd looked around the sparse cabin with obvious concern, but also with something else in her eyes, maybe understanding, maybe sympathy. She'd interviewed Lily privately, asking questions about how she was being treated, whether she felt safe, whether she had what she needed. Whatever Lily had told her must have been enough, because Mrs. Patterson kept approving temporary extensions. Just until we find a suitable placement, she'd say each time. But they both knew that suitable placements for paralyzed teenagers weren't easy to find. Will found himself falling into a routine he hadn't had in years. Wake up at dawn, start the fire, make breakfast for 2 instead of 1. After eating, he'd spend a few hours on his usual tasks, chopping wood, checking his traps, maintaining the cabin. But now he couldn't wander as far or stay out as long. He had to come back, had to make sure Lily was okay. At first it annoyed him, this intrusion on his solitude, this responsibility he never asked for. But slowly, almost without noticing, the annoyance began to fade into something else. Not quite comfort, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Lily had been quiet those first 2 weeks, lost in her grief. But lately, she'd started talking more. Little things at first. Comments about the weather, questions about the birds she could hear outside, observations about how different life on the mountain was from the city where she'd lived. One morning, about a month after she'd arrived, Will was repairing a section of fence near the cabin when he heard her voice calling from inside. "Will, can you come here for a minute?" He set down his hammer and walked back to the cabin, wiping sweat from his forehead. She was by the window looking out at something. "What is it?" he asked. "That bird," she said, pointing. "The one with the red head." "What kind is it?" He looked where she was pointing and saw a red-headed woodpecker working on a dead tree about 30 yards away. "Woodpecker," he said. "Red-headed. They're not as common as they used to be." "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I never paid attention to birds before. In the city, they were just, I don't know, background noise." He stood there for a moment watching her watch the bird. "There's a lot of them up here," he said. "Different kinds. Hawks, owls, jays, chickadees, even eagles sometimes." Her eyes lit up with interest. "Really? Could you teach me about them?" The question caught him off guard. Teaching wasn't something he'd done in a very long time, but he found himself nodding. "I suppose I could." Over the next few days, whenever they saw a bird, he'd tell her about it. Not just the name, but the habits, the calls, where they nested, what they ate. He pulled out an old field guide from a box under his cot, its pages yellowed and worn. She studied it carefully, tracing the pictures with her finger. "How do you know all this?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire. He was quiet for a moment. "I had a lot of time to learn. And up here, the birds are better company than most people." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Is that why you live alone? Because you don't like people?" It was a direct question, the kind he usually avoided. But there was no judgment in her voice, just genuine curiosity. "It's not that simple," he said finally. "I used to have a life down there in the regular world. Family, job, all of it. But things happened and I couldn't stay anymore. Up here, there's no one to disappoint, no one to let down." "What happened?" she asked softly. He stared into the fire, the flames dancing and flickering. Part of him wanted to shut down the conversation, to retreat into his usual silence. But another part, a part he'd thought was dead, wanted to tell her, needed to tell her maybe. "I had a wife," he said, his voice rough, "and a daughter. She was about your age, actually. 14. They died in a car accident 20 years ago." Lily's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, Will, I'm so sorry." "I was supposed to drive them that day," he continued, the words coming out now like water from a cracked dam. "To the mall for school shopping. But I had to work, said I'd take them later. My wife decided not to wait. She drove them herself." He paused, his jaw clenching. "Drunk driver crossed the center line. Killed them both instantly." The cabin was silent except for the crackling fire. Lily's eyes were filled with tears, but she didn't look away from him. "It wasn't your fault," she said quietly. "I know that in my head," he replied. "But knowing and feeling are different things. I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't keep going to that job, couldn't walk down those streets where everything reminded me of them. So I came up here where nothing reminded me of anything." "What were their names?" Lily asked. No one had asked him that in 20 years. People in town knew to avoid the subject. "But this girl, this broken, grieving girl," she asked. "My wife was Jennifer," he said. and saying her name out loud felt like opening a door that had been locked for 2 decades. My daughter was Hannah. Hannah loved birds too. She had a journal where she'd draw them, tried to sketch every species she saw. That's why you know so much about them, Lily said, understanding dawning on her face. He nodded. I kept her journal for a while, read it over and over until I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. But the things she wrote, the things she'd learned, they stayed with me. They sat in silence for a while, 2 people bound by grief and circumstance, both knowing what it meant to lose everything. Will, Lily said eventually, thank you for telling me. And thank you for keeping me here even though I know it's hard for you. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. The next morning he found Lily at the table with a piece of paper and a pencil he didn't know he still had. She was sketching something, her hand moving carefully across the page. What are you drawing? He asked. She looked up, a slight smile on her face. The first real smile he'd seen since she'd arrived. The woodpecker. From yesterday. I'm not very good, but I wanted to try. He looked at the sketch. It was rough. The proportions a bit off, but there was something there. Something real. It's a good start, he said. Over the following weeks she drew more. Birds mostly, but also the view from the window, the trees, the mountains in the distance. She'd work on them during the day while he was outside, and sometimes in the evenings by the firelight. The cabin walls, once bare and empty, slowly started to gain personality. He'd tack up her better drawings, creating a small gallery of mountain life. He taught her other things too. How to identify animal tracks in the mud, which plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous. How to read the weather by watching the clouds. How to navigate by the stars on clear nights. When he'd wheel her outside to look up at the vast expanse of sky, unpolluted by city lights, she absorbed it all eagerly, asking questions, making observations, connecting ideas in ways that surprised him. She was smart, this girl, quick-minded and curious. One afternoon he was showing her how to identify different types of pine cones when she suddenly asked, Will, do you think I'm a burden? He looked at her sharply. What makes you ask that? I see how hard you work, she said. Building ramps, lowering things, coming back early from your work to check on me. Your life was simpler before I came. He set down the pine cone he was holding and met her eyes. Simpler, maybe. But simple isn't always better. What do you mean? He struggled to find the right words. Before you came, my days were all the same. I'd wake up, do my work, go to sleep. One day just like the next, stretching out forever. I wasn't really living. I was just existing, waiting for time to pass. And now? She asked. Now I wake up and someone needs breakfast. Someone asks me questions. Someone wants to learn things. Someone cares if I come back or not. He paused. It's harder, yeah. But it's also more real, more like actual life. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I care a lot if you come back. I know, he said gruffly, uncomfortable with the emotion in his voice. I know you do. That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Lily spoke again. Will, would it be okay if I started calling this place home? He looked at her, this young girl who'd crashed into his isolated life and turned everything upside down. Who'd brought noise and questions and needs into his silent world. Who'd made him remember what it felt like to care about another person. Yeah, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I think that would be okay. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness. Inside, the fire crackled warmly. And for the first time in 20 years, Will didn't feel quite so alone. Winter was creeping closer to the mountain, painting the mornings with frost and sending cold winds through the pine trees. Will had been preparing as he did every year, stacking extra firewood, checking the cabin's weatherproofing, making sure his supplies would last through the long, isolated months ahead. But this year was different. This year he wasn't preparing for one person. He was preparing for 2. Lily had been with him for nearly 3 months now. Mrs. Patterson still came every 2 weeks, each time saying she was working on finding a placement, but each time approving another extension. Will suspected the social worker knew what he was beginning to realize himself. This arrangement, strange as it was, seemed to be working. The cabin had transformed. What was once a bare, functional space for a solitary man had become something closer to an actual home. Lily's drawings covered one entire wall now. A small bookshelf Will had built held the books Mrs. Patterson brought on her visits. A colorful blanket donated by someone in town draped over the rocking chair. One cold November afternoon, Will was organizing some boxes in the corner of the cabin, looking for extra blankets before the real cold set in. Lily was at the table, working on a drawing of a hawk she'd seen that morning. He pulled out an old wooden crate he hadn't opened in years. Dust covered the top and the hinges creaked as he lifted the lid. Inside were things from his old life. Things he'd brought up the mountain but never been able to throw away. There were photographs mostly. His wedding album. Pictures of Hannah as a baby, as a toddler, as a young girl. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations. A whole life packed away in a box and forgotten. His hands trembled as he picked up a framed photo from the top. It showed him as a younger man, maybe 35, with his arm around a pretty woman with kind eyes and brown hair. Jennifer. Next to them stood a girl of about 10, grinning widely, missing one front tooth. Hannah. Is that them? He turned sharply. Lily had wheeled herself over without him noticing, and now she was looking at the photo in his hands. For a moment, he considered closing the box, putting everything away, retreating back into his protective silence. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the gentle curiosity in Lily's eyes. Maybe it was the fact that he'd already told her about them. Or maybe after 20 years he was finally ready to remember them as they were, not just as the people he'd lost. Yeah, he said quietly. That's them. This was taken at the beach. Hannah was 10. She'd just lost that tooth the week before and was so excited about it. Lily smiled softly. She looks happy. They both do. They were, he said. Jennifer could make anyone smile. She worked as a teacher, 3rd grade. Kids loved her. And Hannah, she was something special. Smart, funny, always asking questions about everything. He set down the framed photo and pulled out more items from the box. A child's drawing of a rainbow, signed Hannah in shaky letters. A birthday card Jennifer had given him. A small wooden bird Hannah had carved in shop class, slightly lopsided but treasured. This bird, he said, holding it up. She made this the year before she died. She was so proud of it. Said she was going to make a whole collection of birds, one for every species in our backyard. She never got to finish, Lily said softly. No, she never did. He pulled out something else, a notebook with a worn cover, its pages yellowed with age. He opened it carefully, and Lily could see it was filled with sketches of birds along with notes in youthful handwriting. Is that her bird journal? Lily asked. The one you mentioned? He nodded, running his fingers over the pages. She started it when she was 12, drew every bird she could find, wrote down everything she learned about them. She wanted to be a biologist when she grew up. Said she was going to study birds all over the world. Lily looked at the drawings, some crude and childish, others showing real skill. She was talented. She was, Will agreed, his voice thick. I used to watch her sit for hours by the window, just waiting for a new bird to show up so she could add it to her collection. He turned the pages slowly, and Lily could see the progression of skill as Hannah grew older. The later drawings were quite good, detailed and accurate. Will, Lily said hesitantly, can I ask you something? Go ahead. That day, the day of the accident. What happened after? How did you find out? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the journal in his hands. He'd never told this part to anyone. He'd never wanted to relive it. But sitting here with Lily, with all these memories spread out around him, the words came. I was at work, he said. I was a carpenter back then, working on a house renovation across town. My phone rang around 2 in the afternoon. It was a police officer. He said there'd been an accident, that I needed to come to the hospital right away. He paused, his jaw working. I knew before I got there. Something in the officer's voice. The way he wouldn't tell me anything over the phone. I drove like crazy, running red lights, not caring. But when I got there, they were already gone. Both of them. The doctor said it was instant, that they didn't suffer. Like that was supposed to make it better. Lily reached out and put her hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. The drunk driver survived. He continued, bitterness seeping into his voice. Walked away with barely a scratch. 23 years old, 3 times over the legal limit at 2 in the afternoon. He got 6 years in prison. 6 years for taking 2 lives. That's not fair, Lily whispered. No, it's not. Nothing about it was fair. Jennifer never hurt anyone in her life. Hannah was just a kid, with her whole future ahead of her, and some stranger who decided to drink and drive took all of that away in a second. He closed the journal carefully and set it back in the box. For a while I was so angry. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. I went to the trial. Listened to the driver's lawyer talk about what a good kid he was, how he'd made a mistake, how he deserved a second chance. And I wanted to scream that my daughter didn't get a second chance. My wife didn't get a second chance. No, what did you do? Lily asked. After the trial, I tried to keep going. Went back to work, tried to live in our house, tried to pretend everything was normal. But everywhere I looked, there they were. Jennifer's coffee mug in the kitchen. Hannah's backpack in the hallway. Her bird journal on her desk. I couldn't escape them, and I couldn't stand being without them. He took a deep breath. So one day, about a year after the accident, I packed up my truck with basic supplies and drove up this mountain. I'd been up here camping before, knew there was this old abandoned hunting cabin. I fixed it up, made it livable, and I just stayed. Told myself I'd go back down when I was ready. But weeks turned into months, months turned into years, and I never went back. Did people try to find you? Lily asked. At first, yeah. I had a brother who'd come up sometimes, try to convince me to come home, friends from work. But eventually they stopped coming. I think they understood that I needed this distance from everything that reminded me of what I'd lost. He looked around the cabin. For 20 years, this has been my whole world. Just me and the mountain and the memories I brought with me. I thought that was enough. I thought that was all I deserved. And now? Lily asked. He looked at her, really looked at her. This brave girl who'd lost everything just like he had, who understood grief and loss in ways most people never would, who'd come into his isolated world and reminded him what it meant to care about someone. Now, he said slowly, I'm starting to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe I've been hiding up here, not healing. Maybe I've been so afraid of losing someone again that I forgot how to actually live. Lily's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I think Hannah would want you to live. Not just exist, but really live. The words hit him like a punch to the chest. He'd thought the same thing 1,000 times over the years, but had never been able to act on it. But hearing it from Lily, from this girl who'd suffered her own terrible loss, somehow made it real. You know what's strange? He said. You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, but in spirit. The curiosity, the questions, the way you draw those birds. It's like she sent you here. Maybe she did, Lily said softly. Maybe we both needed each other. He reached back into the box and pulled out Hannah's bird journal again. He looked at it for a long moment, then held it out to Lily. Here, he said. I want you to have this. Her eyes went wide. Will, I can't. This is yours. It's your daughter's. I know. But it shouldn't be sitting in a box gathering dust. Hannah made this because she loved birds, loved learning about them, loved sharing what she learned. You're doing the same thing now with your drawings. She'd want you to have it. Lily took the journal with trembling hands, holding it like the precious thing it was. Are you sure? I'm sure. Maybe you can continue what she started. Add your own drawings, your own observations. Keep it going. A tear rolled down Lily's cheek. I'll take good care of it. I promise. I know you will. They spent the rest of the afternoon going through the box together. Will shared stories about each photograph, each memento. He talked about Jennifer's laugh, about Hannah's terrible jokes, about family dinners and silly arguments and ordinary moments that became precious in their absence. It hurt to remember, but it also felt good. Like opening windows in a house that had been closed up too long. The memories were still painful, but they were also beautiful. Winter arrived on the mountain with a vengeance. Snow piled up against the cabin walls and the wind howled through the pines like a living thing. But inside the cabin was warm and bright. The fire always burning. Two people learning to live together in this isolated world. Will had worried about how Lily would handle the harsh mountain winter, especially given her disability. But she surprised him as she often did. Instead of complaining about the cold or the isolation, she embraced it. She'd bundle up in layers of clothing and ask him to wheel her outside so she could watch the snow fall, her face tilted up to catch flakes on her tongue. It's so quiet, she'd say. Not like the city. There you could never escape the noise. But here, you can actually hear the silence. He understood what she meant. The mountain had its own sounds. Wind through trees, animal calls, the creak of branches under snow. But they were natural sounds, peaceful sounds. Not the constant assault of traffic and sirens and human chaos. One morning in early December, Will was securing a rope line from the cabin to the shed. The snow was getting deeper and he needed a guide to follow during heavy storms. What are you doing? Lily called from the doorway, wrapped in a thick blanket. Safety line, he explained. When the snow gets really bad, visibility drops to nothing. This rope means I can always find my way back to the cabin. She watched him work with that curious expression she always got when learning something new. Can you teach me about survival? Like real mountain survival? He paused, wrapping the rope around a post. Most of that stuff requires being able to walk through terrain, but not all of it, right? She pressed. There must be things I could learn. What if something happened to you? I'd need to know how to survive until someone found me. The thought of something happening to him, leaving her alone up here, sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the cold. But she had a point. She should know basic survival skills adapted to her abilities. All right, he said. We'll start with the basics. Over the next few weeks, Will taught Lily everything he could adapt to her situation. He showed her how to build and maintain a fire, how to ration food, how to melt snow for water. He taught her which plants could be eaten and which were poisonous, showing her pictures from his field guides and dried samples he'd collected over the years. He taught her about hypothermia and frostbite, how to recognize the signs and what to do. He showed her his emergency supplies where everything was kept, how to use the battery-powered radio to call for help if needed. You're tougher than you think, he told her one afternoon as she successfully built a fire from scratch, her third attempt after 2 failures. Most people give up after the first try. She looked up at him, her face flushed with pride and effort. I can't afford to give up. I have to work twice as hard as everyone else just to do normal things. You learn to be tough. He saw the truth in that. She never complained about her disability, never asked for pity. She just figured out how to adapt, how to work around obstacles. It was a lesson in resilience that humbled him, but it wasn't all serious survival training. There were lighter moments, too. Will found himself creating challenges for her, little projects that would build her confidence and skills. He built a special sled, a flat wooden platform with high sides and handles that could be pulled over the snow. With this, he could take her further from the cabin to explore the winter landscape. The first time he pulled her out to the frozen stream, her face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. It's beautiful, she breathed, looking at the ice formations along the rocks, the snow-laden trees, the vast white expanse stretching in every direction. I never imagined it could be this beautiful. He started teaching her about tracking animals in the snow. They'd study the prints left behind. Deer, rabbits, foxes, even the occasional bear passing through. He'd show her how to read the tracks, figure out where the animal was going, how fast it was moving, how long ago it had passed. It's like reading a story, she said one day, examining a set of fox prints. Everything leaves a trace. Nothing passes through without leaving something behind. That's true for more than just animals, he said quietly. She looked up at him, understanding in her eyes. They were both leaving traces on each other, changing in ways neither had expected. In the evenings, while he carved small wooden figures by the fire, a hobby he'd taken up years ago, she would draw. Her skills had improved dramatically over the past months. The awkward sketches from her first attempts had evolved into detailed, lifelike drawings. She'd filled Hannah's old journal and started a new one, creating her own collection of mountain wildlife. You're really good at this, Will said one night, looking at her latest drawing of a cardinal perched on a snow-covered branch. I had a good teacher, she replied. Hannah's notes helped a lot. The way she described things, how to notice the small details. It's like she's teaching me, too. He felt a warmth in his chest at those words. His daughter's legacy, living on in this girl. But Lily wasn't just learning practical skills. She was teaching Will things, too, though she probably didn't realize it. She taught him patience, how to explain things clearly, how to see the world through someone else's eyes. She taught him to laugh again, with her observations about the absurdity of life and her dry sense of humor. One afternoon, she was trying to maneuver her wheelchair through a particularly awkward corner of the cabin and got stuck. Well, this is my life now, she announced dramatically, trapped forever in this corner. Tell my story, Will. Let the world know what happened to me. He couldn't help but laugh, actually laugh, something he hadn't done in longer than he could remember. I think I can get you out before we resort to that. Are you sure? Because I was planning quite a dramatic death scene. Even in dark moments, she found humor. It was a gift and one he was grateful for. As winter deepened, Will noticed changes in himself. He stood straighter. He smiled more. He found himself looking forward to each day instead of just enduring them. The heavy weight of grief that had pressed on his shoulders for 20 years had lifted slightly, not gone but no longer crushing. One evening in late January, during a particularly fierce snowstorm, they were playing cards by the fire. It was a game Will had taught her, something he used to play with Jennifer on winter nights. "Can I ask you something?" Lily said, studying her cards. "Sure. Do you think you'll ever go back? To your old life, I mean. To the regular world?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. A few months ago, the answer would have been an automatic no. But now, I don't know, he said honestly. This mountain has been my home for a long time. But I'm starting to think maybe I've been using it as a hiding place more than a home. What's the difference? A hiding place is somewhere you run to. A home is somewhere you live from, where you grow and build and connect with others. He laid down a card. I came here to hide, but maybe it's time to think about actually living again. She laid down her own card, beating his. I think that's good. You deserve to live, Will, really live. So do you, he said. You've got talent, Lily. Those drawings of yours, they're special. You should be in school, learning more, developing your skills, being around other kids your age. A shadow passed over her face. I don't need other kids. I'm happy here. I know you are, but you can't hide up here forever either. I'm not hiding, she said defensively. I'm home. He recognized the fear in her voice. She'd found safety here, found purpose and belonging. The thought of leaving terrified her, just as it had terrified him for 20 years. Hey, he said gently, I'm not saying you have to leave tomorrow. I'm just saying we both need to think about the future, about what comes next. She nodded slowly, but he could see the worry in her eyes. Later that night, after she'd gone to sleep, Will stood at the window, watching the snowfall. He thought about the future, something he'd avoided thinking about for 2 decades. What did come next? Could he really leave this mountain? Could he rejoin the world he'd abandoned? More importantly, what would happen to Lily? Mrs. Patterson's visits had become less frequent as winter made the roads nearly impassable. But eventually spring would come, and decisions would have to be made. The thought of her leaving, of going into foster care with strangers who might not understand her or appreciate her strength, made his chest tighten. She'd become part of his life in a way he hadn't expected, hadn't planned for, hadn't thought possible after losing Hannah. He looked over at her sleeping form on the cot, her face peaceful in the firelight. Hannah's journal lay open beside her, filled now with both old and new drawings, past and present merged together. Maybe that was the lesson the mountain had been trying to teach him all along. The past and present didn't have to be separate. You could honor what you'd lost while still embracing what you'd found. You could remember without being trapped by memory. You could love again without forgetting your first love. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the cabin, in the warm glow of the fire, 2 people who'd been lost had found something neither had expected. They'd found each other. And maybe, just maybe, they'd found a way forward. The winter was far from over, but spring would come eventually, and with it, changes neither of them could yet imagine. Spring arrived slowly on the mountain, melting the snow inch by inch and turning the frozen ground into muddy streams. The first green shoots pushed through the earth, and birds returned from their southern migrations, filling the air with song. It was the season of renewal, of new beginnings, but with the thaw came something else. The outside world, which had been kept at bay by winter's isolation, began to intrude again. It was a bright morning in early April when they heard the sound of an engine struggling up the mountain road. Will looked up from the garden plot he was preparing, his hands still covered in dirt. Lily was sitting nearby in her wheelchair, sketching the first wildflowers of spring. Someone's coming, she said, a note of worry in her voice. Will wiped his hands on his pants and stood, shading his eyes against the sun. A 4-wheel-drive vehicle came into view, bouncing over the rough terrain. He recognized it as belonging to the sheriff's department. His stomach tightened. Official visits were never just social calls. The vehicle pulled to a stop near the cabin and 2 people got out. Sheriff Rodriguez, who Will knew, and a man in his 30s wearing a suit that looked completely out of place in the wilderness. Some kind of government official, Will guessed. Will? Sheriff Rodriguez called out, walking over. Sorry to drop in unexpected. This is Daniel Foster from Child Protective Services. He needs to speak with you and the girl. Daniel Foster smiled, but it was the professional smile of someone doing their job, not a genuine expression of warmth. Mr. Webb? I'm here to assess the living situation and discuss the next steps for Lily's placement. Will felt Lily tense beside him. He put a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of reassurance. Let's talk inside, Will said. They all went into the cabin. Foster looked around with the same expression Mrs. Patterson had worn on her first visit, a mixture of concern and barely concealed disapproval. The cabin, while clean and functional, was still clearly a bachelor's rough dwelling, not a home suited for a teenage girl by most standards. Lily, Foster said, turning to her with that same professional smile. How are you doing? Are you being treated well? I'm fine, Lily said quietly. Will takes good care of me. I'm sure he does. But I need to ask you some questions, if that's all right. Perhaps we could speak privately? Will felt his jaw clench, but he nodded. I'll wait outside. For the next 30 minutes, Will paced in front of the cabin while Foster interviewed Lily inside. Sheriff Rodriguez stood nearby, his expression sympathetic. They're going to try to take her, aren't they? Will said finally. Rodriguez sighed. Foster's been getting pressure from his superiors. 5 months is a long time for temporary placement, especially in these circumstances. They've got a foster home lined up, a family in Denver who specializes in caring for kids with disabilities. She doesn't want to go to Denver, Will said. She's happy here. I know. But Will, you've got to see this from their perspective. You're a single man living in isolation with no official custody, no legal standing. The cabin has no running water, no electricity beyond that solar panel. You're 3 hours from the nearest hospital. We've been fine, Will argued. Better than fine. She's thriving up here. I believe you. But the law doesn't care about that. The law cares about what looks proper on paper. The cabin door opened and Foster came out, his expression unreadable. Lily followed, her face pale and streaked with tears. Mr. Webb, Foster said. Can we talk? They moved away from Lily, out of earshot. Foster's professional demeanor had shifted to something more serious. Look, I'll be straight with you. By all accounts, you've done a commendable job taking care of Lily under difficult circumstances. She clearly cares about you, and you've provided for her basic needs. But this situation can't continue indefinitely. Why not? Will demanded. Because you have no legal rights to this child. You're not a relative, not a licensed foster parent, not an adoptive parent. You're just a man who found her and kept her. That's not how the system works. The system, Will said bitterly. The system would have put her in some facility where she's just a number. Here she's got a home. She's got someone who actually cares about her. I understand your feelings, but feelings don't supersede the law. I have a family ready to take her. People with experience caring for disabled children, a home with proper facilities, access to good schools and medical care. Did you ask her what she wants? Foster's expression softened slightly. I did. She wants to stay here. But Mr. Webb, a 13-year-old, doesn't always know what's best for her future. She's 14 now, Will corrected. Her birthday was last month. Foster blinked, seeming surprised that Will knew this detail. Regardless, I have to make a decision based on her best interest, not just her preferences. Will felt desperation rising in his chest. What if I became a licensed foster parent? What would that take? Foster looked at him for a long moment. Are you serious? Dead serious. It would mean background checks, home inspections, training courses, regular visits from social workers. You'd have to prove you can provide proper care, education, medical access. This cabin would need significant modifications, and even then there's no guarantee you'd be approved. But it's possible? Technically, yes. But Mr. Webb, the process takes months, sometimes over a year. I can't leave Lily in an unofficial placement that long. How long can you give me? Foster considered. I could potentially delay the transfer for 30 days while you begin the process. But if you haven't made significant progress by then, I'll have no choice but to place her in the Denver home. 30 days. It wasn't much, but it was something. I'll do it, Will said. Whatever it takes. Foster studied him carefully. This is a major commitment. It will completely change your life. Are you prepared for that? Will looked back at the cabin, where he could see Lily through the window sitting in her wheelchair, shoulders hunched in defeat. He thought about the past 5 months, how she'd brought life back into his world, how she'd reminded him what it meant to care about someone, to have purpose beyond just existing. My life already changed, he said quietly, the day I found her. I'm just asking for the chance to make it official. Foster nodded slowly. All right, I'll file the paperwork and give you the contact information for the licensing office. But Mr. Webb, understand this. I'll be monitoring the situation closely. If at any point I believe Lily's well-being is at risk, I won't hesitate to remove her. Clear? Crystal clear. After Foster and Rodriguez left, Will went back inside. Lily looked up at him with red, puffy eyes. They're going to take me away, aren't they? She asked, her voice breaking. He knelt down in front of her wheelchair so they were at eye level. Not if I can help it. I'm going to fight for you, Lily. I'm going to become a proper foster parent, do everything by the book so they can't take you away. Really? Hope flickered in her eyes. You'd do that? I'm already doing it. We've got 30 days to show them this can work. She threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. Thank you, Will. Thank you so much. He hugged her back, this brave girl who'd lost everything and still found the strength to hope. We're going to make this work, he promised. Whatever it takes. But as he held her, over her shoulder he could see through the window to the vast mountain landscape beyond. The life he'd built here, the isolation he'd maintained for 20 years, all of it was about to change. To keep Lily, he'd have to let the world back in. He'd have to fill out forms and attend meetings and open his life to scrutiny. He'd have to prove himself worthy, not to himself, but to strangers who would judge him by standards he'd rejected long ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd come to this mountain to escape society, to avoid responsibility and connection and all the pain they could bring. Now to save the one connection that mattered, he'd have to embrace everything he'd been running from. That night, after Lily had gone to sleep, Will sat by the fire with a folder of paperwork Foster had left behind. Applications, requirements, regulations. Pages and pages of bureaucratic obstacles between him and the simple desire to keep caring for a child who needed him. He thought about turning back, about letting them take her to that family in Denver. It would be easier. Safer. He could return to his solitary life, his comfortable isolation. But then he glanced at the wall covered with Lily's drawings, at Hannah's journal on the shelf, now filled with both past and present, at the rocking chair where Lily sat every evening, working on her art while he carved wood by the fire. This cabin wasn't just his hiding place anymore. It was their home, and home was worth fighting for. He picked up a pen and began filling out the first form. The words were difficult, the questions invasive, asking about his past and his income and his mental health. Every question felt like an intrusion, a violation of the privacy he'd protected for so long. But he kept writing. For Lily, for the future they could build together, for the chance to finally, after 20 years of grief and isolation, have a family again. Outside, spring rain began to fall, washing away the last remnants of winter. And inside, a man who'd stopped living began the hard work of rebuilding a life worth living. The fight had just begun. The 30 days that followed were the most challenging of Will's life, and that was saying something for a man who'd survived 20 years of isolated mountain living. The first week alone was overwhelming. He had to drive down to the county office 3 times to submit paperwork, each form seeming to spawn 2 more. Background checks, financial statements, references from people he hadn't spoken to in years. He had to get a physical exam, provide proof of income, which was difficult for someone who lived mostly off the land, and odd carpentry jobs paid in cash. Then there were the home modifications. An inspector came up and made a list of required changes. The cabin needed a proper bathroom with grab bars and accessible fixtures. The doorways needed to be widened for the wheelchair. There had to be a clear evacuation route in case of fire. Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, a first aid kit that met specific standards. Will worked 16-hour days, rebuilding parts of his cabin, the home he'd constructed with his own hands 20 years ago. He installed a composting toilet system and a shower with a special seat. He widened doorways, built ramps, added safety features. His savings, meager as they were, dwindled rapidly. Lily watched all of this with a mixture of hope and guilt. "Will, this is costing you so much," she said one evening as he worked by lamplight, exhausted and covered in sawdust. "Maybe it would be easier if I just went to Denver." He stopped what he was doing and looked at her directly. "Don't ever say that again. You're worth every penny, every hour, every bit of effort. Understand?" Tears filled her eyes. "I just don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden. You're family, and family is worth fighting for." But the physical modifications were only part of the battle. The harder part was the bureaucratic maze. He had to complete a foster parent training course, which meant driving 4 hours round trip twice a week to attend classes in the city. Sitting in rooms with other prospective foster parents, learning about trauma and attachment and behavioral issues. The classes were taught by a woman named Ruth, who had been a foster parent herself for 15 years. She was kind but firm, pushing the class to really understand what they were signing up for. Foster care isn't about saving children, she told them one evening. It's about providing a safe, stable environment while helping them heal from trauma. It's about meeting them where they are, not where you want them to be. Will thought about Lily, about how far she'd come in the past months, how much she'd grown. He was already doing what Ruth described. He just needed the system to recognize it. Between classes, modifications, and paperwork, Will also had to prove he could provide for Lily's education and medical needs. He arranged for a tutor from a homeschooling program to visit twice a week. He found a physical therapist in the nearest town, willing to work with Lily. He mapped out routes to 3 different hospitals and timed how long each would take in an emergency. Sheriff Rodriguez helped where he could, vouching for Will's character, helping him track down references. Even Mrs. Patterson, the social worker, seemed to be quietly supporting them, making sure Will knew exactly what the inspectors would be looking for. But the person fighting hardest was Lily herself. During one of Foster's follow-up visits, she spoke with a maturity and conviction that surprised everyone. "I know the cabin isn't fancy," she told him. "I know we don't have all the things city people think are necessary. But Will has given me something more important than fancy bathrooms or big schools. He's given me a home where I matter, where I'm not just the disabled girl who needs special accommodations. Here I'm just Lily, and that's all I've ever wanted to be." Foster listened, his expression softening slightly. "I can see that he cares about you, but my job is to ensure you have everything you need for your future. Education, medical care, socialization with peers. I'm getting all of that," Lily insisted. "My tutor says I'm ahead of where I should be for my grade. The physical therapist says my upper body strength has improved significantly. And as for peers, I had plenty of those in the city. They either pitied me or ignored me. Will treats me like I'm capable, like my disability doesn't define me." After Foster left, Will squeezed her shoulder. "That was brave what you said." "I meant every word," she replied. "I'm not going to lose this family without a fight." As the deadline approached, Will received word that his case would go before a family court judge. Judge Margaret Sullivan would make the final decision about whether he could become Lily's foster parent or whether she'd be placed in the Denver home. The night before the hearing, Will barely slept. He lay awake thinking about all the ways it could go wrong. What if the judge thought he was too old, too isolated, too much of a recluse? What if his 20 years of avoiding society counted against him? In the morning, they made the long drive down to the courthouse. Will wore clothes he'd bought specifically for this occasion, uncomfortable dress pants and a button-up shirt that felt like a costume. Lily wore a simple dress that Mrs. Patterson had brought her, and she'd pulled her hair back neatly. The courthouse was intimidating, all marble and echoing hallways. They met with their lawyer, a woman named Catherine Price who'd taken their case pro bono after hearing their story. She'd been encouraging but realistic. "Judge Sullivan is fair but strict," Catherine had told them. "She cares about the children first and foremost. We need to show her that keeping Lily with you serves her best interests." The courtroom was smaller than Will had imagined, but somehow that made it more intimidating. Judge Sullivan sat at her bench, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Daniel Foster was there, along with representatives from the foster home in Denver, a middle-aged couple who looked kind and capable. The hearing began. Foster presented his case first, laying out the facts of the situation and his concerns. "While Mr. Webb has made commendable efforts to care for Lily, I maintain that she would be better served in a traditional foster home with 2 parents, full accessibility features, and proximity to excellent schools and medical facilities." The Denver couple spoke next, describing their home and their experience with special needs children. They seemed genuinely caring, and Will felt his hope faltering. How could he compete with that? Then it was Catherine's turn. She called Will to testify first. "Mr. Webb," she began, "can you tell the court how Lily came into your care?" Will explained the circumstances. How he'd found her, how he'd had no choice but to help. As he spoke, he found himself talking not just about that day, but about everything that had happened since. How Lily had brought life back into his world. How she'd reminded him what it meant to care about someone. How they'd built something together on that mountain, something that mattered. "I know I'm not the perfect candidate on paper," he admitted. "I'm older, I live alone, I've been isolated from society for a long time. But I love that girl like she's my own daughter. And I believe she deserves to be somewhere she's loved, not just cared for." Judge Sullivan listened carefully, taking notes. "Mr. Webb, can you tell me why you isolated yourself on that mountain for 20 years? Will's throat tightened. He'd known this question would come, but that didn't make it easier to answer. He told her about Jennifer and Hannah, about the accident, about the grief that had driven him away from the world. "And you think you're ready to be responsible for another child, after what happened to your daughter?" the judge asked, her tone not unkind but direct. "I'll never be completely over losing Hannah," Will said honestly. "But hiding from life isn't the same as healing from it. Lily has shown me that. She's shown me that it's possible to remember what you've lost and still embrace what you've found, that you can honor the past without being trapped by it." Next, Catherine called Lily to testify. The bailiff helped position her wheelchair near the witness stand. Judge Sullivan's expression softened as she looked at the young girl. "Lily, I understand you want to stay with Mr. Webb. Can you tell me why?" Lily took a deep breath. "Before I met Will, I felt like my life was over. My dad had died, I had no family, and I was this disabled kid nobody really wanted. I thought I'd spend the rest of my childhood being passed around to different homes, always being the problem that needed solving." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "But Will never treated me like a problem. He treated me like a person. He taught me things, challenged me, believed I could do more than I thought possible. He gave me a home where I'm not defined by my wheelchair, where I'm just me." "But don't you want to be around other children your age?" the judge asked. "To go to a regular school? I did have that before, Your Honor, and I was miserable. The other kids either felt sorry for me or made fun of me. I was always different. Always the one who couldn't do what everyone else could do. But on the mountain, that doesn't matter. What matters is who I am, not what I can't do." Judge Sullivan made more notes, her expression unreadable. "What about your future, Lily? Education, career opportunities. Don't you think you'd have more options living in a city?" "Maybe," Lily acknowledged. "But what's the point of having options if you're not happy? If you don't have anyone who really knows you, who really cares about you? Will has shown me that home isn't about having the fanciest things or being in the best location. It's about being with people who love you." 6 months had passed since the court hearing, and the mountain cabin had transformed in ways Will never could have imagined. The modifications required by the judge were complete, but they'd gone beyond that. The cabin now had a proper bathroom with accessibility features, wider doorways, better insulation, and even a small addition that served as Lily's bedroom, giving her privacy and space of her own. But the biggest changes weren't physical. They were in the way they lived, the rhythm of their days, the sense of permanence that had settled over everything. Sarah Mitchell, the tutor who came twice a week, had become more than just an educator. She was a friend, someone who brought news from the outside world and encouragement for Lily's remarkable progress. Lily was now working at a 9th grade level, ahead of her peers with a particular talent for writing and art. "She's gifted," Sarah had told Will one afternoon. "Truly gifted. With the right opportunities, she could do anything she wants." The physical therapist, an energetic woman named Carmen, had similar praise. "Her upper body strength has improved by 40%, Carmen reported during one of her monthly visits, "and her attitude is incredible. Most kids complain about the exercises, but Lily pushes herself harder than I push her." The monthly visits from Mrs. Patterson had become almost pleasant. No longer was she coming to assess whether Lily should be removed. Now she came to check in, to see how they were doing, to offer support and resources. "You've done something remarkable here, Will," Mrs. Patterson had said during her last visit. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen a child flourish quite like Lily has with you. But perhaps the most unexpected development was what happened with Lily's art. It started small. Sarah had mentioned to a friend who owned a small gallery in town that her student was an incredibly talented artist. The friend, curious, had asked to see some of Lily's work. Will had been hesitant, protective of Lily's privacy and unsure about exposing her to potential rejection. But Lily had wanted to try. "What's the worst that can happen?" she'd asked. "They say no, and I keep drawing anyway." So they'd brought down a portfolio of her best work. Detailed sketches of mountain wildlife, landscapes that captured the changing seasons, studies of birds in flight. Each piece was technically skilled but also held something more. A sense of emotion and connection to the natural world that came from truly seeing and understanding it. The gallery owner, a man named Robert Chen, had been silent for a long time as he looked through the portfolio. Then he'd looked up with tears in his eyes. "These are extraordinary," he'd said simply. "How old did you say she is?" 14, Will had replied. "I'd like to display these, and I think I can sell them." Lily's first art show had been 2 months ago, a small corner of the gallery dedicated to her mountain wildlife series. Will had been nervous, worried that no one would come or that people would dismiss her work as amateur. Instead, the opening had been packed. People from town, tourists passing through, even a few art collectors from bigger cities who'd heard about the young artist. By the end of the evening, 12 of her 15 pieces had sold. Lily had sat in her wheelchair, overwhelmed and beaming, as strangers complimented her work and asked about her process. For the first time in her life, she wasn't defined by her disability. She was defined by her talent, her vision, her unique perspective. The money from the sales went into an account Will had set up for her future. Education, medical needs, whatever she might want or need down the road. She was building something for herself, creating opportunities through her own efforts. Now, as autumn painted the mountain in gold and crimson, they had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were for schoolwork. Afternoons were for art and physical therapy. Evenings were for sitting by the fire, talking about their days, making plans for the future. Tonight was special, though. It was the first day of December, and they were decorating their first Christmas tree together. Will had cut down a small pine from his property, and now it stood in the corner of the main room, waiting to be transformed. "I can't believe I've been here over a year," Lily said as she carefully hung a handmade ornament on a low branch. They'd made the ornaments themselves, carved wooden birds and painted pine cones. Simple but meaningful. "Feels like longer," Will said, adjusting the tree stand. "In a good way, I mean. I know what you mean. It's like my life before this was a different person, like that Lily was someone else entirely." He understood that feeling. He too felt like a different person than the man who'd driven down the mountain that October day, 14 months ago. That man had been hiding from life, running from pain, existing but not living. This man had purpose, connection, a reason to wake up each morning beyond just surviving another day. "Do you ever miss it?" Lily asked suddenly. "Your old life before you came to the mountain?" He thought about it carefully. "I miss Jennifer and Hannah every day. That never goes away. But the life I had after they died before you came, no, I don't miss that at all. That wasn't living. That was just waiting to die. And now? Now I'm living again. Really living." "And that's because of you." She smiled, that genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "It's because of both of us. We saved each other, Will." He couldn't argue with that. As they continued decorating, there was a knock at the door. Will opened it to find Sheriff Rodriguez standing there, stamping snow off his boots. "Tom," Will said, surprised. "What brings you up here?" "Just wanted to drop something off," Rodriguez said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "This came to my office. It's addressed to Lily." Lily wheeled over, curious. She opened the envelope carefully and pulled out a letter. As she read, her eyes went wide. "Will," she said, her voice shaking. "It's from the State Art Council. They want to feature my work in their Young Artist Showcase next spring. It's a big deal." "Really big." Will felt pride swell in his chest. "That's incredible, Lily. You deserve it. There's more," she continued reading. "They're offering a scholarship for advanced art classes at the community college. I could take classes part-time starting next fall." Rodriguez grinned. "Sounds like you've got quite a future ahead of you, young lady." After the sheriff left, promising to stay for Christmas dinner next month, Will and Lily sat by the fire, the partially decorated tree glowing softly in the corner. "A scholarship," Lily said, still processing. "College classes, me? Why not you?" Will asked. "You're talented, hardworking, dedicated. You've got everything it takes. But college means going into town more, being around lots of people. What if they treat me different because of the wheelchair? Some probably will, Will said honestly. But you know what? That's their problem, not yours. You've learned that up here. Your worth isn't determined by what other people think or how they treat you. It's determined by who you are and what you create. She nodded slowly, the fear in her eyes gradually replaced by excitement. You'll come with me, right? To the classes, every single time if that's what you want. Though something tells me you won't need me there for long. You're stronger than you think, Lily. I learned from the best, she said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire dance. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, covering the mountain in white. Will? Lily said eventually. Do you think Hannah would have liked me? The question caught him off guard. He'd thought about that before, but never voiced it. Yeah, he said, his voice thick. I think she would have loved you. You two are a lot alike. Curious, creative, brave. She'd have been proud to call you her sister. Lily wiped at her eyes. I wish I could have met her. And your wife, me too. But in a way, you carry a piece of Hannah with you. That journal, the way you see the world, your love for birds and nature, she's part of your story now, just like you're part of hers. I like that, Lily said. It makes me feel connected to something bigger than just myself. As the evening wore on, they finished decorating the tree. It wasn't fancy, no store-bought ornaments or electric lights, just what they'd made themselves and some candles they'd light on Christmas Eve. But it was perfect. It was theirs. Later, after Lily had gone to bed, Will sat alone by the fire, looking at the tree, the drawings on the walls, the comfortable chaos of a home shared by two people. He thought about how far they'd come, both of them. He'd come to this mountain 20 years ago to escape life, to hide from the pain of loss. He'd built walls around himself, convinced that isolation was safer than connection, that numbness was better than feeling. But Lily had torn down those walls, not through force, but through simple presence. She'd needed him, yes, but he'd needed her too. She'd given him a reason to care again, to hope again, to believe that life after loss was still worth living. The court had called him her guardian, her foster father, but really they'd saved each other. Two broken people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment, who'd built something beautiful from their shared grief and loss. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the mountain in quiet white. Inside, the fire burned warm and bright, a beacon of life and love in the wilderness. Will pulled out his old journal, something he hadn't written in for years. He turned to a fresh page and began to write. Dear Jennifer and Hannah,